This session is being recorded, so please keep your microphones muted. If you would like to ask a question, you can enter it in the chat and we will make sure that, that it gets answered. We're very pleased to have Bob Schoeneman from Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers with us today to present on ethics, mental health, and social media. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody today. So technology and ethics and mental health, why should anybody listen to this guy from Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers? Well, in addition to being a lawyer, I also have a master's in marketing from the University of St. Thomas. And before I went to law school, I was a chief operating officer for a small-sized food manufacturing company in South Minneapolis. One of my responsibilities there was to direct the activities of our IT department. So I have a unique understanding of some of the technologies that we have today. Today's topics, as you'll see on the screen in front of you, work environment and technology, with a specific focus on the ethical implications of technology. And these 5 rules I'd like you to keep in mind. Rule 1.1 on competence, 1.3 on diligence, 1.4 on communication, 1.6 on the confidentiality of information, and Rule 5.1, supervisory, for those of you who are in a supervisory role over other attorneys or would like to be at some point in your future. Pay special attention to that supervisory role. We're also going to touch on how technology impacts our mental health, as well as suggestions for managing your tech. But first, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This presentation I originally put together back in January of 2020. Then the world changed. COVID-19 came along and this became a different presentation. We started talking about social isolation, and social distancing, and we started looking at technology in a different way. So let's start with some important uses of technology that help us to stay connected with our colleagues, our friends, our family, and our loved ones during the pendency of the pandemic, which hopefully we're coming to a close on. Remember when telephones used to bring us together? That was all they did, though. You could only talk to them. Back in the 70s and 80s, when I was coming of age, AT&T ran commercials with the tagline, "Reach out and touch someone." I thought about incorporating some of those ads in this presentation, but decided against it since reach out and touch someone amid the COVID pandemic didn't seem to be such a good message. In addition to texting, playing music, playing games, watching Netflix, and staying on top of work, believe it or not, your smartphone can also be used to call people and talk to them. Just like the old telephones that used to hang on the walls, we can use our smartphones to stay in touch with other people. In addition to phone calls, we have web conferencing capabilities now that were only science fiction a short time ago. Web conferencing like Zoom, like we're using today, Google Hangouts, Skype, FaceTime. Texts and emails aren't quite the same, but they're there. The thing with texts and emails, as we'll see as we move further into the presentation, is that they can actually worsen feelings of isolation. And isolation, as was noted on the slide a couple of slides ago, isolation is both a cause and a consequence of substance use disorders and certain types of mental illnesses. And it's something that we need to keep an eye on and monitor in our own lives and the lives of our families and colleagues and loved ones. So let's talk about the context of the legal profession. Nearly 1 in 12, or 20.3 million adults, had a substance use disorder in 2019. That's a really big number. And with really big numbers like that, sometimes it's really hard to conceptualize how many people that is. So to give you an idea of how many people 20.3 million is, I want you to consider the total population, the estimated population of North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Arkansas. You might recognize those as the 7 states comprising the 8th Judicial District. They had a combined estimated population in 2019 of 21.5 million people. So when we look at the number of people, the number of adults who had a substance use disorder in the US in 2019, it's approximately the same size as the entire population of the 8th Judicial District. That's a lot of people. Nearly 1 in 5, or twice as many adults, had a mental illness in the same year, and 10 million had serious mental illness. This is a big problem. 7.7 million, almost 8 million people had both. 8 million people is the population of Minnesota plus Iowa combined. That's a lot of people suffering from substance use disorder, mental illness, or both. Turning just to American attorneys. And this is data coming from a 2016 study funded by the ABA and Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation. They surveyed 12,825 licensed attorneys who are actually practicing. 20.6, or roughly 1 in 5, had met the criteria for potentially problematic use of alcohol. Okay, what does that mean? It means they're drinking more than doctors think they ought to. Okay, for doctors, incidentally, it's roughly 1 in 10. So doctors are also guilty of not following their own prescriptions. For new attorneys, it's 1 in 3. New lawyers are those defined in this study as younger than 30 or less than 10 years of practice. And what the study found was that the younger the lawyer, the greater the likelihood of substance use disorder and depression. This kind of turns our understanding on its head. We had, for many years, had thought that the longer you practice, the more likely you were to develop a substance use disorder. And it turns out that it's the other way. The newer the attorney, the higher the likelihood. Lawyers love mnemonics. You know, back in law school, we had IRAC and CREAC. We have FEMLA for the Family Medical Leave Act. And here's a new one for you, CAGE, C-A-G-E. I'm going to pull these up here. Is there a problem? You'll note that this mnemonic is written for a person to ask themselves the question, but it works just as well to apply to yourself or to anyone else about whom you may be concerned. Ever tried to cut down? Ever felt annoyed when somebody else criticized or even commented on the drinking use or behavior? This was a big one for me. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I just celebrated my 8-year sobriety anniversary. And I remember back when I was drinking, I would get incredibly annoyed if anybody just mentioned that I was having another drink or that commented on the amount that I had been drinking. I would get really annoyed. Guilty. Have you ever felt bad or guilty about drinking use or problematic behavior? And specific to alcohol, an eye-opener. You know, have you ever experienced the surefire hangover cure of a hair of the dog that bit you, where you drink a little alcohol in the morning to take care of the hangover from the night before? It's been mentioned in TV shows and movies, and Hollywood has mentioned that several times, and it's a real thing, needing that eye opener. It tends to be more specific to alcohol use disorders than to other substance use disorders, but it can still be there. As we're looking out in the future, this question of is there a problem and other substances and behaviors is going to become more of an issue as Minnesota looks again at the possibility of legalizing recreational marijuana use. Other substances and behaviors, as you see listed here, there are a lot of things that we can use as people, not just as lawyers, but people. Remember, lawyers were people first. Before we were lawyers, we were people, and we still are people. And as people, we have a tendency to behave in ways that can become potentially problematic, as you see here listed on the screen. One of the thing that all of these things have in common, in my, in my way of thinking, is that they become problematic when we engage in them to either avoid something painful or shaming or something we don't want to deal with, or we're trying to escape a situation that we don't like being in. So it's either avoidance behavior or escapism that drives problematic behavior. You'll notice I've bolded internet addiction, and I've got a little subcategory here I refer to as I escapism. And it's kind of an umbrella term that I use when talking about internet gaming, online pornography, social media, YouTube, TikTok, whatever the next big thing turns out to be, which will probably appear and disappear in the next 50 minutes while we're talking during this presentation. Things move that quickly. Why do these things become problematic? Alcohol I can understand, drugs I can understand, but behaviors like gambling or sexual compulsivity or eating disorders, shoplifting, how can these things become a problem? That's a big, long, complicated answer. The short answer is that behaviors activate key areas in the brain in ways that are similar in effect to drugs of abuse. Most of these behaviors feature escapism in their early stages. That's escapism or avoidance. Since the 1990s, so in the last 30 years, neuroscience research has demonstrated that the mind can literally alter the structure of the brain, okay? What we think about really does become or drive who we are. Internet gaming addiction, incidentally, is mentioned in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 5th edition that came out in 2013. The DSM, as it's called, is a publication of the American Psychiatric Association, and it's pretty much a cookbook for mental illnesses. It's used primarily for diagnostic purposes and insurance purposes. Internet gaming addiction is mentioned in there, but is not a diagnosable disorder because of a lack of consensus regarding the diagnostic criteria at this time. The thinking is that the next edition, when it comes out, will include that. So what does computer overuse look like in general? And we're talking about technologies, but let's just look at computers alone. What does it look like in general? Physical ailments, as you can see here, I'm not a big believer in reading slides to people. So you've probably read this faster than I could read it to you. But I've got three points here that are bolded: skipping meals, neglecting hygiene, and sleep disturbances. I have these bolded because these can also be symptoms of depression. When we begin to skip meals, neglect our personal hygiene, and our sleep is disturbed, can be symptoms of depression. So there's an overlap between what is just generally a failure to get up and stretch or rest your eyes or get up from your desk every now and again. There's an overlap with that and the symptoms of depression, and that can complicate diagnosis, and it can also, if you're in the early stages of depression, it's easy to brush it off as, oh, I've just spent too much time at my computer. What does it look like from a psychological standpoint? And again, we've got a whole laundry list of symptoms here or events, but I want you to look through this. And as you look through it, consider replacing the word computer and computing wherever it shows up with alcohol, problem gambling, substance use, any of those behaviors we saw before, whether it could be online porn, whatever, it ends up being the same list. Computer overuse in general, from a psychological standpoint, is indistinguishable from the psychological effects of substance use disorder and certain compulsive or problematic behaviors. Indistinguishable from a psychological standpoint. Within that framework, what does it look like at work? And again, we've got a shorter list of things that happen in the workplace when computers are overused. But I want to look at not just overuse, but a specific type of use that happens in the workplace. Supervisor site checks, that's where they in the 80s, we used to call it management by walking around. It's supervisors who would check up on employee workstations, and or perhaps the company is using internet tracking on its network. What this often reveals is that there's a lot of cyber slacking and inappropriate sites being used on the job. Within a law firm, sometimes when things are out of whack in a person's personal life, an attorney or a legal professional may be focusing on what's fun versus the work that is difficult and demanding. And in that situation, we need to be asking ourselves, what is the next right thing that I should be working on? And I understand the need to to let off steam every once in a while, and sometimes playing a video game can do that for you. But when it becomes an obsession, that's when things become really problematic. Turning just to mental health, that's that 2017 study on depression within the legal profession. In the last 12 months, attorneys were asked, and then they were given what's referred to as the DAS-21. It's a diagnostic measurement tool for depression that physicians use. You might have taken it when you go to the doctor for any reason. They're now doing regular routine screenings for mental health issues by using the DAS-21, or sometimes it's the DAS-7. In 2017, the national average, or the national statistic for the incidence rate of severe depression in the United States among adults was about 4.5%. For attorneys, in the last 12 months, when this study was done, 28%, 1 in 4, met the criteria for severe depression. 18%, or 1 in 5, met the criteria for severe anxiety. Anxiety rates within the US adult population are thought to be similar to depression rates, perhaps a little higher, because anxiety is the most frequently reported mental illness is severe anxiety. During the course of their career, 11.5% of attorneys, that's 1 in 9, had considered suicide. I want to point out a couple of things about this slide. First, the survey was of practicing attorneys. Their careers weren't over yet. So when we talk about 1 in 9 had considered suicide, that's up to that point. They still had more career to go through. And these are all snapshots of a moment in time before the pandemic. Reports coming out are that the incidence of depression and anxiety and even suicidal ideation have all gone up during the pandemic. We don't have those numbers yet for comparison, but even if they haven't gone up, this is for people in the legal profession, these are crisis level numbers, even if they haven't gone up during the pandemic. So let's talk about depression. Depression is a unique experience. Each person suffers depression in their own way. I mentioned a little bit ago that I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I'm doubly blessed because I'm also a person who has suffered with a major depressive disorder for pretty much all my adult life. And actually, my alcoholism probably started as a way to self-treat depression, which is incredibly common among people who suffer from depression, that rather than seeking help from a professional, they self-medicate with alcohol or whatever drugs are available. Very, very common. So depression is unique, and each person suffers in their own way. These stages listed here, these 4 stages, these reflect my own experience, okay? Somebody else's experience might be different. My depression begins with the feeling of emptiness, followed by hopelessness and helplessness, but it's not like the emptiness goes away and now I'm hopeless and helpless. It's the emptiness, and then on top of it comes this hopelessness, helplessness. Then there's this general malaise. I don't feel like doing anything. I don't want to get out of bed, followed by suicidal ideation. The thing with depression is that depression is a lot like the weather, okay? We can't influence the weather, okay? We can't make it, look outside and it's kind of a cloudy day here in Inver Grove Heights. We can't snap our fingers and make it sunny. No, we can't change the weather, and we can't change depression. But there are things that we do every day to mitigate the effects the weather has on us. We don't even think about them. It's going to be a rainy day, we bring an umbrella. We heat and cool our houses depending on what time of year it is. We wear different clothes. We wear boots. There are things that we do to mitigate the effects the weather has on us. Similarly, there are things that we can do, there are things I do every day to mitigate the effects depression has on me and on our lives. These things are kind of included in the idea of self-care, okay? Strictly speaking, for a clinical definition of depression, this loss of interest in normally pleasurable activities has to persist for a minimum of 2 weeks. But I encourage people, if you are feeling any of these things, don't wait to pass the threshold of being clinically diagnosable. Get help on day 3 or 4. LCL is here. We can help and we will help. Give us a call. Our numbers are down on the bottom of every slide here, and calls are answered 24/7, 365. If you're concerned about a colleague, look for changes in behavior, because changes in behavior are really indicative of something unseen has changed as well. Depression is not the only mental health issue that the legal profession deals with. Listed here are others. And it's interesting to note that ADHD, which is oftentimes thought to be a kid's condition, that only children have that is not accurate. ADHD is a mental condition that stays with you your entire life. And yes, it's treatable with medicine. And many people are living with ADHD. Many attorneys are living with ADHD. LCL actually has a ADHD support group for legal professionals with ADHD. Let's look at smartphones and internet addiction, okay? Because this is, after all, focused on technology. Individuals with heavy use, and this is from a study in 2017, I believe. Could be, no, I'm incorrect on this, 2019. Individuals with heavy use, whether smartphone addiction or internet addiction, and we're setting aside the question of, well, are they really addictions or are they just problematic behavior? Doesn't matter. They're still problematic. People with heavy use show higher levels of depression and anxiety. The effects associated with smartphone use, heavy smartphone use, were more pronounced than heavy internet use. And that is more than likely because we bring our smartphones with us. We're not always staring at our laptop screen or our computer screen. but we are frequently looking at our smartphone screen. There's been at least one study that found a causal link between smartphone use and the development of depression and anxiety in susceptible people. It's not just that they were correlated, but that heavy use of smartphones caused depression and anxiety. That's a huge leap to go from correlation to causation. We're looking at this vicious cycle of depression symptoms, but there's a similar vicious cycle featuring anxiety symptoms. So the point here is that there appears to be evidence that depression and anxiety may be both a cause and a consequence of problematic smartphone use. Full-time attorneys, this is all pre-pandemic stuff. 1 in 3 regularly work 50+ hours a week. 75% work outside of regular business hours. Significant pressure to produce billable hours on many attorneys and associates. So the issues we're talking about today aren't just about people who, lawyers who are depressed or lawyers who have substance use disorder. We're talking about healthy lawyers too. Okay, we're talking about the entire legal profession. Looking at recent trends, you're not going to be able to look at this very long because it's no longer relevant. Again, this presentation was done before the pandemic hit, and things changed. Suddenly we shifted and a lot of people are working from home. And that is a significant change from what it was like pre-pandemic. So what kind of risks are we looking at now? We have confidential information stored remotely. Inadvertent disclosure of confidential information. This was happening before the pandemic as well. My favorite example of this is I was staffing a table outside one of the a CLE presentation that somebody else was doing at the Minnesota CLE Conference Center in Minneapolis. I was staffing a table there, as LCL has done for years, just being available to people who wanted to talk or wanted information. And the program was going on, and a gentleman stepped out of the program because he had received a cell phone call, and he was talking in the hallway, and he was talking really loudly, and there was a lot of arguably confidential information that anybody within earshot was privy to. So we have that type of inadvertent disclosure, as well as the more insidious type of equipment being hacked and spyware and ransomware, other network security issues. BYOD, if you're not familiar with the term, is bring your own device. BYOD security. Many of us are living in a BYOD world now, where we bring our own devices to work and we access work resources using our own devices. There are issues around that. Public Wi-Fi, even using VPN software, virtual private network software, public Wi-Fi remains fundamentally insecure. Okay. Home networks increasingly feature so-called smart devices. We used to refer to as IoT devices, Internet of Things, TVs, Alexa, Google Nest, Amazon Ring, all those other things. Each of these that are connected to your home network have their own vulnerabilities. Okay, they're hackable. Many users have not installed basic security software on their smartphones. Many don't think it's an issue. Many have never even thought of it. Many consumers, if they have thought about it, they're lax in installing patches and updates. Plus, there's the ever-present danger of laptops and devices being stolen. Just some headlines from early 2020 to scare the living daylights out of you if you manage tech for your firm. Technological innovation changes the legal landscape, and it does so much more quickly than it used to. Okay. Consider the lag time between the creation of a new technology, its adoption by business or consumers, and changes in the law. Okay. I have an example for you. It was published in an article called Fax Pax, was published in the February 5th, 1990 Network World newspaper or magazine. It was an industry magazine. 1990 was not that long ago, 30 years ago, roughly 31 years ago. This particular article was written by an attorney, and it discussed the question of the legality of faxed business contracts. The legality of faxed business contracts. The article offered a couple possible solutions: having the document notarized prior to faxing, with the notary recording the event in his or her register in case a court needed to review it, or possibly employing a third-party intermediary to receive the fax, retain a copy, and forward the fax to prevent document tampering on either side. This is only 30 years ago. This is before the e-sign law was passed. How do we deal with signed faxes? That was a big question in 1990. How long did it take us to get to that point? Well, the first patent for fax technology was granted in 1843. Yes, that's right, 1843. 1850 saw the invention of what was called the copying telegraph. In 1860, the first true fax was sent between Paris and Lyon, France in 1860. 130 years later, we got to the point of how legal is a signature on a faxed contract. Contrast that time period with how quickly businesses are adopting new technologies now. 30 years ago, it took 130 years for us to get to that point. The point being, of course, that technology is changing things much more rapidly. It changes the legal landscape as well as the landscape of our personal lives. I really like this meme. If the Breakfast Club was remade today, it would be a silent film about 5 kids staring at the cell phones. Any of you have teenagers, you know that's true. Let's look at how much screen time we have. We're looking not only at smartphones, but look at the amount of our interaction with electronic devices. Looking at television, many hours per week, 26.5 per week of television for 25 to 34-year-olds, 36.5 for 35 to 49-year-olds. Again, pre-pandemic, 2016, Americans watching more than 7 hours, almost 8 hours per day of television per household, according to a 2018 survey. Internet use, people are averaging 1 day a week, 24 hours per week on the internet. That's 1 day out of 7. That's about 15% of their time is devoted to the internet. Smartphones, we're looking at 4 hours per day on smartphones, 2 hours, almost 3 hours for adults. Nokia, with the study, people look at the smartphones 150 times a day. 2016, Americans sending 94 text messages per person per day. That's the sending, not the receiving, the sending. You have here on this screen, we have some results of other surveys that were done, smaller sample size. This one is 1,634 US smartphone owners in July 2017, also pre-pandemic. 47 times a day, smartphone owners check their phone. Contrast that with Nokia's finding of 150 times back in 2011. Did we really stop looking, or is it just sampling bias? Who knows? The more important thing here is that 85% use their smartphone while talking to friends and family. This doesn't mean that they're talking on the phone to friends and family. It means that they're fiddling with their smartphone or doing something, checking email, texting, whatever, while also talking with friends and family. They're multitasking. 80% check their phone within an hour after getting up or before going to sleep, with 35%, over a third of us, doing it within 5 minutes. Many of us have tried, half of us roughly, have tried to limit smartphone use in the past. Clearly, we sense that there's an issue, that there's a problem. We're spending too much time interfacing with our smartphones. Looking just at social media, we've got minutes per day for Facebook users. The next screen, we're going to look at Facebook and Twitter users, and Pinterest and LinkedIn. Before we continue there, I do want to highlight there's a clear link between Facebook use and depression. And there's a quote from Stephen Furtick, who is he does a lot of preaching online. I like to think of him more as a motivational speaker. He's quoted as saying, "The reason we struggle with insecurity is because we compare our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reel." Okay. The reason we struggle with insecurity is because we compare our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reel. Being unfriended on Facebook, we feel bad about that. And increased loneliness is shown among more intense Facebook users. Loneliness is a predictor for depression. Social media, there's different social media sites with average visits per day, again, pre-pandemic. Add it all up and we get average screen time, 71 to 90 hours a week, which is roughly 42 to 53% of the time. Daily screen average, 10 to 13 hours pre-pandemic. That is a lot of time spent looking at and interacting with electronic screens and electronic equipment. How many of us are spending 10 to 13 hours a day interacting with our family and our loved ones? It's probably not anywhere close. Here's some specific data around teenagers and the impact on social life and depression, which I'm providing because many of us have children and are worried about the effects of electronics and on children's mental health. So this is where we are now. We are mobile and always accessible. Okay, our smartphone has become like a ball and chain. In 1948, an Austrian philosopher named Joseph Pieper published a short book called Leisure, the Basis of Culture, in which he cautioned us that our society had been shifting at that time, post World War II, to a focus on total labor, working all the time. And his warning is that we will vanquish leisure, and he warns that unless we regain the art of silence and insight, the ability for non-activity, unless we substitute true leisure for our hectic amusements, we will destroy our culture and ourselves. And now, fast forward to 2021, we live in a world full of hectic amusements and not much opportunity for non-activity and true leisure. So I'm a bit like I forgot his name, famous character, Tilted at Windmills, that is on a quest to promote Don Quixote. Thank you, thank you, people in the chat. Don Quixote. This is what I get when I improvise off the script. I back myself into a corner. Don Quixote, at tilting at windmills, trying to convince people to relax more, enjoy life, and that we work so that we can enjoy leisure. We don't have leisure so that we can work more. One lawyer commented in to one of our case managers, and she gave us permission to use this. One lawyer commented that she's not working from home; she's living at work now, and that's part of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the upshot of all of this is that our relationships are suffering. Oftentimes, the time and attention we give to our smartphones is taken from our close relationships. That's where we ought to be spending our time. Instead, it's being taken from us in drips and drabs by our smartphones. Anybody ever experience a phantom vibration or phantom ringing? When you hear a ping or feel the buzz and you can't check it, you feel stressed. Your body releases a little bit of cortisol. Doesn't happen, it's not a bad thing until it happens hour after hour, day after day. It becomes chronic stress. And research suggests that as far as the brain is concerned, there is no difference between how the body responds to acute traumatic events, like a car accident, and chronic exposure to varying levels of stress. There's no difference as far as the brain is concerned. So what is stress? We talk about chronic stress. I just mentioned chronic stress, but what is stress? Stress is a series of physiological responses and adaptations to a real or imagined threat or demand, okay? Stress keeps us alive. This physiological response keeps us alive. It can be good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. Eustress is the good stuff. We hardly ever talk about eustress because it is good. Distress is the bad stress. Usually when we talk about the effects of stress or the effects of chronic stress, we're talking about distress, the bad stuff. This is my favorite Shakespeare quote from Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2, where Hamlet states, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." In other words, there's a bumper sticker out there that suggests that stuff happens. You can substitute whatever you want for the word stuff. Stuff happens. What we tell ourselves, our internal narrative, makes the difference in how we will respond, how our body will respond to that stressor. Again, distress is that to which the word stress is typically intended to mean, and it has detrimental effects. It generates physical and psychological problems, things like heart disease, hypertension, some lead into to diabetes, can all be related to stress. In contrast, eustress, the positive stress response, has beneficial effects. We feel fulfilled. We develop mastery of tasks or subject matter, and it's associated with high levels of performance. How do we handle this distress, this bad stuff? Well, what are you currently doing? I'm going to put it to you that we all seem to know what we need to do to manage our stress better, but we just don't do it. Why is that? We keep coming up with excuses on why we can't do it right now. I can't go for a walk because it's snowing out, or it's, someone's going to call me in a few minutes. There are many excuses, many reasons we will put out for why we're addressing our stress levels. Little things like, something small, going around the block, stretching, those kinds of things can be enormously helpful, and it doesn't have to be a 4-hour walk. It can be a quick 20-minute brisk walk around the neighborhood. Managing a stressful situation. This is a protocol for how to handle a stressful situation in the moment. Ask yourself, what is causing the stress? Then ask yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen? And what must you do to cause or allow the worst thing to happen? A lot of times that's just nothing. If you do nothing, the worst thing is going to happen. Then ask yourself, what's the best thing that could happen? And what can you do to increase the likelihood of that best thing happening? What this protocol does is it shifts you out of the passenger seat into the driver's seat of the situation. You're driving the solution because you are doing something positive to increase the likelihood of a better outcome. And you're choosing to do so. This is sometimes very difficult to do because stress, especially high levels of stress in a stressful situation, diminishes our higher brain functioning. It kind of knocks out our cognitive functions. And we kind of have to reboot. And one of the ways to reboot those higher cognitive functions is to take a few deep cleansing breaths. And that stimulates the vagus nerve, which kicks the parasympathetic nervous system into action and will mitigate or start to turn down the stress response and allow your cognitive functions to come back online. This is a program on ethics, and I asked you earlier to keep these rules in mind as we go through this presentation. Regarding Rule 1.1, when lawyers are overworked, the quality of their work inevitably begins to suffer. What can be problematic when trying to comply with, and that situation is problematic when trying to comply with the requirements of thoroughness and preparation. Long hours, remember the statistic that how many lawyers work more than 50 hours a week? Long hours require lawyers to work quickly and efficiently, but sometimes working too quickly can lead to missing key arguments, cases, site checking, etc. And as technology has enabled things like legal research to be done quicker, there's been a corresponding expectation that, well, since it takes you less time to do the research, your research should be more thorough, and you should be able to find those outlier cases that could be problematic down the road. Remember those words, quickly and efficiently. They're going to come back to us. Diligence. When lawyers allow their workloads to become overwhelming, they can be at a risk for violating this rule because they're not allowing themselves the time to fully represent each client. It's important to recognize that one's ability to handle a particular workload changes over time. It ebbs and flows according to many factors, including experience, events in the lawyer's personal lives, etc. My ability to handle cases goes way down if I'm in the middle of a contentious divorce. And the divorce has nothing to do with the firm. However, it does affect my ability to work. Communication. For this one, I think there's a little bit of wiggle room here because, what does promptly mean? What does reasonably mean? And I think the way to approach this, or the way I prefer to approach it, is a course of dealings analysis. If you're not familiar with the UCC, a course of dealing is defined as a sequence of conduct concerning previous transactions between the parties that is fairly to be regarded as establishing a common basis of understanding or interpreting their expressions and other conduct. In other words, you've got a client. How you've communicated with that client in the past sets their expectation for how you're going to communicate with them now or in the future. Okay, so be careful what expectations you allow the client to set. If you start representation and every time the client emails you, you're right on it, bam, 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 and then suddenly you have more cases and you're not as responsive, the client is going to think there's a communication problem, even though the manner in which and the timing of your communication is within what anybody would objectively say is reasonable. But it's not reasonable to the client because it's been a change in the way you've communicated with them. Supervisory. Remember, if you're a supervising attorney or want to be in the future, you can be held directly responsible for the ethical lapses of lawyers over whom you have supervisory responsibility. Okay, the same extends to the firm. Confidentiality of information is particularly of particular note when we look at technologies. In a bring your own device world, law firms don't necessarily have much influence in the security of the employees' devices, but the firm has a huge interest in the security of its data. So here we have a situation, they have no say in what's on the employees' devices or how those devices are managed, but it's their information and they're on the line for the confidentiality and security of that information. Consider how that interplays with Rule 5.1, the supervisory rule. If you're supervising attorneys and they're using their personal smartphone to access firm resources, and they don't have security software on their smartphone, or it's not updated or patched, who's going to be responsible for that? Is it an ethical lapse? If it is, who's ultimately going to be responsible? More than likely, it'll be the supervisor. There are the big three E's, what technology is doing for us. It's either making us more effective, making us more efficient, or it's just entertainment. And ask yourself, what is it that the technology is doing for us? Generally, technology tends to address improved efficiency and productivity, okay? Yes, there are some software things out there that help us with effectiveness, but by and large, most technology is dealing with efficiency, all right? And there are trade-offs. Effectiveness, well, think about how the difference is applied to lawyering. Efficient lawyers can churn out volumes of work product. Effective lawyers win cases and client loyalty. There's a need for both. You know, we need efficient lawyers and we need effective lawyers, but they're not interchangeable. Multitasking is all about efficiency. It's not about being effective, okay? So if you are trying to multitask, you are trying to increase your efficiency at the expense of effectiveness, how well you're able to do your tasks. So is your tech helping you to be more efficient or more effective? Emotionally intelligent people understand that when there's a situation that calls for effective interpersonal communication skills as opposed to efficient. You know, if there's a fire, efficient communication is what you need. You need to be yelling fire so that people get up and move, all right? However, when it comes to feelings and attitudes, effective communication is a whole ballgame, and there's no time constraint to it. It takes as long as it takes. The Mehrabian formula was established back in 1981. There was incongruence between words and expression. When people were talking about feelings and attitudes, it was determined that 7% of the message is in the words that are spoken, 38% is the way they're said, and the other 55% is facial or body language. This does not apply to written communication regarding factual matters, okay? This deals with feelings and attitudes. So let me ask, have you ever felt misunderstood when trying to communicate feelings or emotions over the phone, over email, over text messages? Ever had that where you get a text message and go, what the heck does she mean by that? And what exactly do emojis mean? I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here because we're running low on time. I do want to take off my lawyer hat and put on my marketing hat. Remember, the practice of law is a service business. Make your clients feel like they are the most important person to you during their appointment. Many of them feel their matter is or should be your most important case because it means so much to them. They may know intellectually that you have other clients that are perhaps larger or more important. However, knowing and feeling are two different things. Treat each client as the important person they know they are. It costs so little for you to do, but the returns are huge. There are certain best practices Consider setting set email times, deactivate notifications. I'm a huge believer in deactivating notifications. Each notification places a demand on your brain, even if it's only a decision to ignore the notification. And each demand made is a distraction from the work you're trying to do. Remember, multitasking is about efficiency, not effectiveness. Turn off the notifications to lessen the multitasking. Manage the apps. I take the things off your phone. Install wellness, mindfulness, or other healthy apps. Disconnect. There are certain things there are a lot of reasons why you shouldn't charge your phone in your bedroom. One of them is it's no longer within arm's reach, and you're not going to get notifications in the middle of the night that wake you up because the phone's in another room. And think of it as kind of out of sight, out of mind. Reading a book or magazine, the physical book or magazine is actually, you get better retention because you're engaging more senses, more sensory input than just the screen. And take some breaks away from your PC. If someone from your office needs to be available on weekends, set up a schedule where responsible people take turns. This has worked well across numerous industries, doctors, managers, maintenance workers, et cetera. Don't take the laptop with you on weekends or vacations. If you do choose to engage in social media, set meaningful limits and stick to them. 10 minutes per platform per day should be plenty. Unless social media is part of your job, social media outreach, how much do you really need to be exposed to it? Unfollow unhealthy friends. Even though, yes, unfollowing somebody on Facebook can be a negative experience for them, it's still better for you to unfollow friends who are hateful, hurtful, or distressing. Work and home balance. Are you working from home or living at work? Technology has allowed employers to encroach on non-work time at an unprecedented level. Technology and vacations. Rediscover what the word vacation means. Actually take time away from work. It's an incredibly freeing experience. Schedule self-care time. 4% of your life is 1 hour per day. Make that the minimum for self-care. If an hour is too much to start with a tenth of an hour, 6 minutes, build up from there. Self-care is what we do for ourselves that allow us to care for others. Genuine self-care activities are nothing about which to feel guilty. I had to get over that myself. I figured self-care was selfish. It's not. Such activities, self-care activities, enhance our effectiveness and our abilities. If you want a healthier relationship with your phone, the 7-day phone breakup challenge is not about getting rid of your phone. It's about creating a relationship with your phone that feels good. It's about taking advantage of the benefits smartphones offer while minimizing the downside. Practice gratitude. This can be as a family, it can be as an individual. There are many, many gratitude activities, including journaling. When my kids were little, we'd ask them at the dinner table, what are your 3 favorite things that happened today? It doesn't have to be a chore. I remind everybody that Thanksgiving isn't just a day in November. There was a study done a number of years ago that contrasted winners of the lottery, recent winners of the lottery, with people who did not win the lottery, but agreed to start a gratitude journal. And in the months that followed, the people who had started the gratitude practice and kept with it ended up being happier at the 6-month mark than people who had won the lottery. Help others. Pro bono service hours, which embody the intrinsic value of altruistic service, also predicted increased well-being. This is from a Krieger and Sheldon article, What Makes Lawyers Happy, a data-driven prescription to redefine professional success. It was published in 2015 in the George Washington Law Review. Helping others really helps ourselves. Those of us in the recovery community are familiar with this. It's referred to as the 12th step, helping others, and we I can't overemphasize it. A little bit about who Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers is. It's 1 o'clock now. I apologize for taking an extra minute of your time. LCL is confidential, free, and statewide. We serve lawyers, judges, law students, and their families, and we help with any problem that's preventing people from doing their best work. We have a partnership with Sand Creek. You can get up to 4 free counseling sessions. They have a resource website that has many articles and other resources on a variety of topics, and you can access that for free. When you create your account, use the company code LAWYERS. If you want to contact LCL, here is our contact information. We do have a Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel. And in closing, if you or a colleague or a family member are experiencing a problem and think it's going to go away by itself, it's not going to. Call us, call LCL. We can help and we will help. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.